All right, this is Jack Donovan, and I'm here with CB Robertson, and you are listening to or watching PH2T3R, Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. And today we are going to talk about writing. And I sent out some questions, asked for some questions from people from our newsletter, got some from people on Instagram, and I think hopefully we'll have some in the chat at some point, but I got a bunch. I got 4 or 5 by email. But I wanted to start out where the question is, everybody is not a writer, nor should you try to be. It's not really like a path to wealth and fame, really. Most people just write a book and there it is. But we write more than I think we ever have. I joked in my newsletter that the average man writes more than a Mesopotamian scribe. We have phones in our hands all day long. People are texting, like they're actually using. Before, you'd have a man who wouldn't graduate from high school. Like my grandfather didn't graduate from high school. Like his writing was probably not fantastic at all, and he didn't have to. He was an electrician on the railroad, and that was fine. But today, everybody writes all the time. Whether you're commenting on the internet, all this stuff, you're actually using the written word, which people didn't really do that until very, very recently. The average man writes a lot. So I think being able to communicate in writing is important as you've argued in the past that being able to argue a point in rhetoric is a useful skill in life.
Which is a not an original argument of mine. I'm just bringing Aristotle up into the present moment. There is this movement online, this sort of post-physique, this everyone go to the gym, get jacked, get swole, which is awesome, which is fantastic. Very, very here for that. But that's not like a complete path. And there are other skills that you want to, balance that out with. You should be going to the gym. And the line from Aristotle in rhetoric is, it is absurd that a man should think it, important to be able to defend himself with his limbs, but not think it important to be able to defend himself with his words, when words are more characteristic of the human animal than the use of limbs. And I mean, what I love in that sentiment is it sort of takes for granted the premise that you should be training for combat and for strength. And it says, just as you would be strong here, you should be strong in this other domain as well. And, he preempts the critique of the sophists. Isn't it tricky? Isn't it somewhat suspicious? People who get too strong too skillful in their words, too crafty. And he says that critique is something that can be made against all virtues except virtue itself. A strong person can become a bully. A person who's very talented at making money can use it the way that we see a lot of wealthy people using their wealth for today. All of these good things can be used for ill purposes, but that's not an excuse to not develop the skill.
Right. And the example that comes to mind is I often use it as I'm very distrustful with people who are extremely good with sales. Right. Which is a black magic talent at a certain level. And they can do it in email too. I know a bunch of professionals that actually, that's their whole living is getting you to the point where obviously you're going to click to purchase it at the end of going through their cycle of magic that they've created, that even, whether it's, I don't know, butthole bleach or whatever they're selling. I don't know. Whatever they're selling, you're going to buy it by the time they're
2024. They use the sun now instead of.
I'm sad that that's the first useless thing I could come up with, but that's. Anyway, going back to talking about writing, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is, and we talked about this a little bit before, but I think people who are listening to this specifically for talking about writing. Or asking questions about writing or learning to write better, is that writing is a thinking process. And I guess this is why people are told to journal.
Yes.
You and I are both writers. So, I mean, this is our journaling, I guess, and in many ways, we're working through our thoughts, but most people don't do that all the time. So I guess maybe that's why journaling is maybe more helpful for them to sort through, what do I actually believe? What do I think about what's going on? All these things, whereas we have to comment on things all the time. So we're doing that, working through problems. And some of the questions I thought of that I do while I'm writing, because I think people think that you just sit down and write and you already have your opinion. You're just a blah, 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 and you just craft the sentences. And a lot of times, I mean, like, I have to stop constantly the entire way through it because I'm writing philosophy. I guess if I was writing just a different kind of writing, but I'm writing about thinking or ideas. And so I'm constantly asking myself, I made a statement that sounds good, but is it accurate? Like, is that correct? Like, I'll stop myself through it. I'm like, we were talking because we're both working on some writing pieces and editing right now. And I was going through a piece today and I'm like, said something that like the image of the future that people had in like the 1950s and 60s was, kind of very optimistic. And then I stopped and thought, and I'm like, actually, they were all building bomb shelters too. And there was a play called On the Beach where they waited for the dark cloud to come. And so there's this undercurrent that wasn't hopeful at all. Like, I was comparing it to dystopian futuristic visions that we have now and thinking about like the Jetsons or whatever. But I'm like, well, is what I'm saying really true there? And so I had to go down through a rabbit hole. I'm like, and how do I make it so I'm qualifying it and that it makes sense to what I mean? And because otherwise I'm just saying something ridiculous, like, right. So, and someone's going to point that out, like, that's not true. So you have to go through all that. And so if you're doing it right, it seems maybe easier that it just came out, but like I had to like address all of those points just to make that one statement that's not even an important part of my thing and my argument.
There was a Christopher Hitchens quote that came to mind at the very beginning of this podcast when you were talking about how like everyone's writing, which doesn't mean everyone should write a book. Hitchens was being interviewed by someone about George Orwell, and he made the point that George Orwell was not a genius, was not a towering intellect, but his books were still excellent, because of his power of observation, which he interpreted as saying, it just goes to show that there's a book inside all of us. But for most of us, that's where it should stay. But I mean, to your point about that process, Hitchens was an unusually gifted sentence architect in putting words together. And he, in a separate context, said something to the effect of, beautiful sentences come to me, and I have to be very watchful because some of the most beautiful sentences are not actually quite right, not true, and you have to kill those darlings, which is a classical bit of, that's like Strunk White or one of these other great stylists.
It is from, because I wrote it down because I was going to talk about it too.
Oh,
it is. Stephen
Yeah.
King is famously says it a lot. And I think his book on writing, I've never read it, but I had to look it up, and it's like Sir Arthur Couch. I don't know how you pronounce that last name because it's kind of a French English name, but and it's on the art of writing in 1916. Wrote, if you here require a practical rule of me, I will present you with this: whenever you feel an impulse to perpetrate a piece of exceptionally fine writing, obey it wholeheartedly and delete it before sending your manuscript to press. Murder your darlings. And so that's what it came from, and then a whole bunch of other authors repeated it in their advice to writers. And
it's very zen.
Yeah. It just delete it. But what it means, and I have to do this all the time, and it is painful, is that you sit there and spend 10, 15, 20 minutes coming up with this beautiful sentence. Like this is exactly the way that I need to say this thing that I'm trying to say right now. I'm like, oh, that's a really nice vignette. I went and looked up all the words that had to go to it and picked the perfect ones. And there's a little bit of alliteration that I like. That's my whole jam. I think I said to someone that in our group in the Order of Fire, I said, whenever I do alliteration, that's basically me doing like finger guns. I'm like, pa, 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 pa. Like I'm like, yeah. So alliteration will just come to me. Like I can't rhyme for shit, but alliteration just comes to me. And so it had alliteration, it had everything. And then I posted it the other day, I think as a tweet. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, that is not necessary from the point I'm making. Like none of that is necessary for the point that I'm making right now. And I think that's the essence of really this kill your darlings thing is like, yes, you can have a beautiful sentence and a beautiful idea and whatever. But you really have to look at the logical flow of what you're saying because writing is communication.
Right.
And so if that doesn't need to be there and it's just distracting and it's like a curly cue that goes off in another direction, as cool as it is, it doesn't belong there and you pull it out.
I think we mentioned Steven Pinker in some previous episodes, but he has a book, absolutely one of his best books, I think, called The Sense of Style. And he's he uses style guides of writing from the past as exemplars of good style, because of course style, advocates are going to be exemplars of good writing style, you'd expect anyways. And Strunk and White, he said his favorite bit of advice was the omit needless words. Mm-hmm. And he says what's perfect about it is it's actually a complete sentence. There is no superfluous words in that phrase. It exemplifies itself in this. You can't take anything away from it. And it's also good advice.
Like you could say words that are not necessary, and that's longer.
Yes. Precisely.
Needless is tighter.
Yeah. And omit is it's a verb, and it's a command. Omit needless words. Done. There's like a million different ways you could write that in, like, 10 words or 5 words, maybe 4 words, but 3. Perfect.
Yeah. That's great.
But I mean, these are bits of advice on how to write well, but I don't know if we addressed the question of why it would be worthwhile to write in the first place. And it reminded me, thinking about it 10 minutes before we started, there's a gentleman I follow whose wife had, I guess, a friend. This is, I'm not omitting needless details here. Had a friend who in college said, "Man, I've got so many great ideas. I just can't put them into words." And her response was, "Then what you have aren't ideas. They're just feelings." And I love the directness of it, but it's true. It's accurate. And there's a very underrated philosopher, anti-enlightenment philosopher from the 17th century named Johan Hamann. He's a German Lutheran philosopher who, among other things, said that you can't actually think without words. Contra Steven Pinker, what Pinker says in one of his other books, that you can think without words. I think Hamann argues that you actually can't. You can take action without words. You can, like, in a martial arts context, you don't need to know the name of a stance in order to respond to a stimulus.
Right.
But to have ideas in the proper sense, to have these, to be able to articulate a thought with all of the, implications we have with a thought or an idea, you require words. And the more practiced you are in the use of words, the better you're going to be at navigating them and conveying them. And writing is a bit like trying to speak and think without writing is a bit like trying to do a classical martial arts form without a mirror. Some people are just going to be naturals at it. But if you put a mirror, and if you're trying to do a martial arts move or a dance move, perhaps, and you can actually see the feedback, see how what you're doing looks compared to what other people you've seen do. It gives you reflective, self-correcting ability that you wouldn't have necessarily had just by speaking.
Right. There's a level of self-awareness that you can't really get from that. It's an interesting comparison. Like a mirror. Obviously, same thing with, like, you say, squat form. If you have video of it, oh, I'm not hitting depth. And you don't,
Right.
it feels like you're hitting depth, until you've done it, until you know what hitting depth feels like. It feels like I feel quite low.
Yes.
I feel quite low, but until someone's there to either tell you you're not, or you see it, I'm like, oh, you're like, oh yeah, that's a lot.
And you see an extreme example of that as a father with, 4 and 5-year-old kids who see daddy do some push-ups, like, oh, we're going to do push-ups too. And, their bodies are like, 90-degree angles up, and they're, it's not nowhere even close to a flat plank position. Right. And you're like, I'm not going to go out of my way to show them that. They're still, 3 and 5. Yeah, that's fine. But it's an amusing, example that you see sort of by comparison, people who are in their 30s or their 50s or 60s very often on, social media comment threads, and people think they are making some absolute backhand of an argument in their all caps with 8 exclamation marks at the end. And it almost makes you wish you could let them sober up and then show them back their comment the next day. Because there's like an unpracticedness in the writing on social media that doesn't seem to be the same kind of writing as when you're writing out an essay or a journal entry. There's like it's a reactive rather than a reflective mode of articulation that seems a lot closer to spoken speech than written speech.
Yeah, I mean, we won't talk about this for too long because,
right.
But it just reminded me, I made that post, I think yesterday or the day before on the Order of Fire's Instagram account about misanthropy, and I've said this for years, like decades. Every misanthropist is really just a frustrated idealist,
right? And
it's true. Like it's because, and the reason why is because humans are the only conscious beings who can actually evaluate like a moral position. Right. So like your entire framework for judging humans comes from humans to begin with. And then you're comparing them to something that obviously, if you look at history, we know how they behave. It shouldn't be surprising that they're behaving like they've always behaved. So why are you mad about it? I mean, obviously we are mad when people don't behave the way we wish they would. Right. But to say that I hate all humans or I hate human, well, compared to what? What do you like better? That's also a conscious being because there isn't one that we know.
Right.
And so, I had a commenter say like, no, I'm not comparing it to anything. I'm just a misanthrope. People are garbage, blah, 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 blah. It was just like, but like was digging in his heels about that he's not comparing it to anything. And I was like, and I said exactly what I just said to you there. And he's like, well, no, I don't agree with that. I still think that humans are garbage and that's just how it is. And I was just like, you don't think very deeply, do you? And like, you don't think about thoughts. Like you're not understanding what I'm saying. Like that's you're not all the way there. So, I mean, and that's just, I think maybe an intellectual level of discourse that people do, but you can obviously, if you do a little bit more writing, think about thoughts because that's what this writing kind of stuff is. And that's why I said, in the beginning, as I was saying, as you're going through this writing process, I mean, you are actually like saying, do I actually believe what I said?
Right.
Yeah. And if you can make statements and be like, you're feeling, because I have feelings about a lot of things, but like, wait, do I actually believe that? Or am I just having a feeling? And then also then is that a responsible thing to say? Like in public, like, is that something that I want someone else to act on or whatever? I mean, they have their own agency and it's not my problem. I suggested it. But is that a responsible thing? Is that improving the world or not improving the world by making that suggestions? In the way that I said that influencer X is saying he's a nihilist out loud and and has a huge audience and has all these people. I'm like, it's irresponsible thing to say to young men.
Yeah.
Like, be a nihilist. Oh, cool. Good job, buddy.
Yeah.
You know, like it's an irresponsible thing to say. Whether or not you feel that way inside, blah, 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 blah. That's like, do you know what the repercussions of telling millions and millions and millions of young men to be nihilists are? That's
it's so like to talk about your previous misanthrope, like it's such an annoying. I'm not a huge fan of argumentation ethics. I think they're generally stupid, but with nihilism in particular, like, do you believe other people should be nihilists?
Right.
Do you believe you should be a nihilist?
Yeah.
And if so, on what grounds?
Yeah.
Like
work out the math of where that leads.
Well, it's like there's no nihilistic foundation for nihilism. You know, is the point. Like right. As soon as you say someone should be a nihilism and you say because why, there's the back door out of nihilism right through the same revolving door you came in by. Like it's actually a pointless statement to say I am a nihilist. If you are a nihilist, there's no compulsion to assert that. If you say, well, I'm a nihilist, therefore I think you should just pursue power and wealth, then what you actually are is some kind of hedonistic utilitarian, which is different. It's not the same thing. And like there's no, and this is the kind of value that writing can bring, because it can take you out of these, like when you say I'm a nihilist, you're doing what that one guy's wife said. You're not actually having a thought. You're kind of just emoting. Right. In that sense, unless you're using nihilism in a very technical sense. But I don't think random social media influencers are rejecting specifically moral theories rather than value, you know.
Yeah, I mean, basically what he's saying is Cartman. He's just Cartman saying like, "I'll do what I want." You know, like that's cool. At the end of the day, that's what he's fucking doing.
Good job.
Yeah, good job. I do what I want. All right. Cool. Yeah. But that brings me to something that I take a lot of pride in. And I think you do too. While we're writing, because people were looking, obviously watching this to hear the process. Yeah, the process stuff. And tips and so forth. And one of the things I don't think people will understand how much I care about this is picking the right word. And I will absolutely go down a rabbit hole of exactly the right word. What did it mean 1,000 years ago? What are the roots of it? All these things, you know, not for every single thing that I say, because most of the words I know, we speak in language where most of the words are very familiar to us and whatever. But if I'm trying to pick a word for a specific point or meaning, I will often just wonder. That's part of how my mind works. I'm like, because I have a fairly big writing vocabulary. My speaking vocabulary is trash, but my writing vocabulary is much, much bigger. And I'll pull big words out of my head that I've read from somewhere. And I have a really good sense of context of what they mean, but I'll still look them up a lot of times, like to make sure that I'm using that word correctly. Because a lot of people use words that they've heard in a certain context, but it actually isn't right for the context that they're putting it in. So they're misplacing a word and then they're making themselves sound dumb. Because for anyone who actually knows what that word means. So I will look things up, even if I have a pretty good idea. And I'm usually right. You know, it's usually the right word, but I will look that up. You know, like I encourage everybody to look up more words than you think you need to.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to about what that word really means, you know,
if you want to make a psychologist double face palm, talk about corporal punishment, like spanking, talk about it as negative reinforcement. It will make them just roll their R's and be like, oh God, where do I begin? And it sounds correct. Colloquially, it sounds accurate. Like it's negative and it's reinforcing what the standards that the parent wants.
Yeah. And
it's like in psychology, including developmental psychology and like parenting, stuff like that, behaviorism, as counterintuitive as it sounds, you know, spanking or punishing of that kind is positive reinforcement because you're adding something to it. And it's one of those thoughtless little things that people can accidentally say that is like natural and intuitive, but can make you sound dumb without really thinking about it, because these things already have meanings attached to them, and whether that was your intended meaning or not, you're still invoking these meanings.
Yeah.
When you bring
sometimes you
point.
can pull out the popular meaning, and that's fine because
Right.
it depends on your audience. But yeah, I mean, it's worth looking up and make sure. It's funny, you made me laugh when you said that, because it's like an old friend of mine who likes to pretend that he's dumber than he is, but he has like a redneck kind of mentality, and he always used to say negative reinforcement, but he would use it for like just making fun of me. Basically, or like anybody, like I like to use negative reinforcement. You fucking suck. You're fat. Like whatever. But yeah, it's a different. It makes sense to him, and everybody knows what he means. But if you're going to write something, obviously you want to be a little more precise. But one thing I wrote down about choosing the right word, and like I said, I will get really, really, really precise about things. And sometimes it's also there's 5 different words, and one of them is perfect. Like one of them is like really nice. I think I picked one yesterday. I forget what it was, but I looked back at the roots, and it actually meant it was calcitrant and calcify. And I was using it to describe people. And like calcified, we all know what that means right off the top of my head, because it's something calcified is turned hard, and not right. Kind of like you use ossified a lot, and
tell words.
Yeah. But so calcified makes sense, and everybody knows what it means. Calcitrant actually has Latin roots that basically mean digging your heels in.
It's is it the opposite of recalcitrant? Because recalcitrant sounds like, yeah, it's sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to look it up. I'm not going to make a definitive statement, but I did dig into the definition. I mean, calcitrant sounds like calcified. It sounds like it should be the same root. Like it should be some different version of the same word, but it's not at all. And it actually has something to do with like heels kick, like it heels kicking, like in it. And so I was like, oh, that is descriptive. Like that. I love the heels digging it, but no one will know that.
Right.
And so my point that I wanted to bring up about choosing the right word is that also you have to know your audience, and you can make a brilliant point and use the perfect word, but if no one knows what it means, it's like you said something to an audience that nobody understands. You're a comedian and your joke flopped because no one knows what you're talking about.
I've got to share a somewhat of a digression of a story. My uncle was a very high caliber lawyer. And was at one point making an argument before, I don't know if this was the Supreme Court case, but like a very high up court. And he was showing my dad the transcript of his argument, and my dad was reading it and was like half comprehending what was being said. But there was one word that stuck out to him. He's like, "Whoa, what a word! Where'd you find this word?" And my dad didn't know what it was. I actually don't know what the word was, but it stuck out to my dad. And my uncle was like, "Oh, you like that word, huh?" My dad's like, "Yeah, where'd you find that?" My uncle had dug through the judge's high school papers and college grad papers and essays, which were for some reason publicly accessible, and had read through all of those and found this word that the judge had used on some of his essays. That was like a very particular word, and decided to use it in his argument in front of the judge, and ended up winning the case with it. So like taking your audience, understanding your audience taken to the like 10th degree, but it can work. And speaking, pacing and leading your audience, meeting your audience where their language is rather than the language you want to say, speak in, is a big part of the communication goal that you were talking about. Not just not using words that you want to use, like calcitrant or most of the words I want to use, but but positively going out to find what are the words that are like key, meaningful and powerful to the audience.
Right.
And you also come to understand the ideas that are conveyed by these words better. Like insofar as writing as a process is concerned, I began writing The Hero and the Man as a defense of heroism. I was like, it was a feeling, not an idea. Right. And the more I dug into and explored this, because you have to do a lot of research on these things, it turned from an advocacy thing into a descriptive project about what actually is a hero, which was very different than what I thought it was going in. And so the writing process is as much a research process and a spelunking exploration of the meanings of these words, as it is, just putting your pre-existing thoughts into words that might not even be a thing.
Oh, absolutely. That's so much of what this is. And I've often wondered, I can feel my age in my writing a little bit, because I often feel like I need to take in more popular culture, because like men of a certain age, my popular culture, like, it's tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, and like older and older and older and older. And so I find my references are so Gen X. I start making inside jokes to the audience that you only know if you're over 40. And that's a problem, because I'm still trying to reach young. I want to reach guys in their 30s and 20s, but if I'm making a joke about a movie that they've never seen, I'm making this inside, and I'm like, I think the best things in writing is when you can slip something in there, and you know that 3/4 of the people that you're reading will pick it up.
Yes.
But you didn't actually say, as they said in the movie, blah, 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 blah. Right. You just kind of throw in half of a line of something that everybody knows.
There's a film producer, Andrew Stanton, who did Toy Story and WALL-E and a few others. And he said that the number one rule of storytelling, which he says is also the rule of joke telling, I would argue maybe writing in general, is you give the audience 1 + 1. You don't give them 2, which is like, there's a fine line to balance between omitting needless words and being clear, but also not insulting the intelligence of your audience, not being excessively repetitive or what's the word? I don't want to say too clear, because being clear is kind of an absolute ideal, but you give them 1 + 1, and you credit them with the intelligence to put things together on their own.
Like,
and
maybe,
it makes
maybe I was pedantic, like tiresome.
Yeah.
Pedantic, I mean, well, a perfect example, which you kind of almost said right there, was if I say the first rule of something is something, to half the guys my age, it's a Fight Club reference.
Yes.
But if you haven't seen Fight Club, that meant nothing to you. Right. So there's so many things like that. And some of it's like, it takes a refined taste to appreciate this. Right. If I, like, sometimes I'll be writing something, and I'll say like if I'm writing a manifesto, I might say there's a specter of something. And if you've read the Communist Manifesto, it starts, there's a specter of communism going across Europe. Like, right. Little things like that are like little Easter eggs that you can put in for a well-read audience. And then, but a certain level, if you take it to a certain level, you're writing like Ezra Pound. And really like, oh, I've written this, and I've written 1 page in 5 languages, and and have references to things you've never read.
I feel like the best writing is like a Disney movie, where like the kids will follow along and will enjoy it, and they don't miss the references for the parents that they don't get. They're like superfluous. Yeah. But there are enough Easter eggs and those little fill in the gaps bits for the parents that it's like entertaining at that level as well.
Right. I guess some of those, some of those are basically dad jokes. Really, I mean, because I always say that the thing that makes a dad joke good is that it only has to make me laugh. Like, it's like it only has to make the guy laugh. Then it's a dad joke, because it doesn't matter if you care. It's just like
my daughter has taken to asking for beverages by saying, "Dad, I'm thirsty," in a very declarative, almost commanding tone, and I have taken great delight in turning to her and say, "Hi, thirsty, I'm Dad," and it, like, the slowness of the delivery and the dramatic emphasis on the phrase. I'll look at my wife first. I'll be like, "Hi, thirsty," and everyone like groans. And it's absolutely wonderful, and it's a fun way of teaching her to not ask for drinks like that because it's rude and it's annoying. But it's also fun for me. And the slowness of the delivery is its own kind of humor that lets you anticipate the pain of the second shoe dropping in another second before it drops. It's fun.
Oh, all right. So I want to cover real quick some things I threw out here that I don't think a lot of people know. I put them in my newsletter today, but not everybody reads that. Who's going to watch this on YouTube or want to learn about writing? But a big thing that we didn't have a year ago, it might be a year, maybe a year and a half, I don't know, is AI as a writing tool, which was not real a few years ago. And I came up with 5 ways that you can use AI in a way that's not trash, because AI writes like an NPC. Like ChatGPT writes like an NPC. Like if you wanted Barb in marketing to write you basic, like cheery, like marketing letter, it'll do that. And like if you're a really basic person, maybe you'll be like, yeah, I would like to buy that, but everybody else will be just like,
before we get into the rules, can I just say real quick, to Taylor and Shitbird Militia and Mortician and a few others, we're seeing your comments in the live feed.
Okay, cool.
We'll get to those.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely will. I have a bunch of questions that we want to answer. I just want to get through some material first, and then we'll jump into that. Everybody's questions. Thank you for looking at that. So anyway, it writes like an NPC, which is what it is. Actually, it's literally like the idea of an NPC is that, non-player character in the video game that's just run by a computer, and that's what it is.
Literally.
Yeah. So it's no surprise. But what I found is, and I only did this the other day for the first time, was AI can actually bridge, like ChatGPT can actually bridge the gap between a dictionary and a thesaurus. Because there's so many times, especially when you and I, like, we're looking for an advanced, like, I want a word that describes this, and it's like a sentence, like, or a big phrase, like things that ... And you can't find that in a dictionary, and you can't find it in a thesaurus. You can't ask ChatGPT, what is a word that means this, that, like a whole sentence of things, and it'll come up with a list of things.
You can't tell it to write your haiku, but you can tell it to find the right word for your haiku.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, it'll write a haiku for sure. But that's an easy thing that it can do. It might not be good, but then haikus are kind of hard to judge. But anyway, you can ask it for a very specific combination of things, which, like, normally if I would have to do that with a thesaurus, a lot of times I know the word, I just can't get it. And I'm like, what is the word? Or that's when you start asking like a friend, like, what is the word that means blah, 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 blah. And ChatGPT will actually answer that in a pretty good way. So that's a good way to use it where it isn't just writing for you. Brainstorming is another one. If you ask it to write something for you, a lot of times it'll give you back something that annoys you enough to write it correctly.
Yes.
It'll give me something that's so canned and annoying that I'm like, okay, well, that was a good idea, but that was gross, and here, let me fix all this.
And it sets you out the scaffolding and the structure to work around. It's like, okay, part 1 is okay, part 4 and 5 are okay, parts 2 and 3 are absolute trash, and it's missing part 7. And you can like restructure it and take what it gave you and say what's wrong with it becomes your diving board for diving into the subject. Or it critically misused this one word, which is why in anticipation of I just paid and set up this study for my journeyman test as an electrician, and I've been using ChatGPT on and off to create sample test questions. And the wonderful thing about that is, even if it creates a crap question, that doesn't make any sense. Looking through the code book, it's still a valuable question as a crap question, because looking through the code book can help you illustrate why it's a crap question. It's still getting you to look in the right places. And overall, it's actually very, very good at that, because there's a lot of information about the electrical code online. So, even where ChatGPT delivers obnoxiously NPC or even straight up false information, it can still be useful as a generative tool for a writer. Sort of like what we were talking about in one of the previous conversations about, working on a 6x9 sheet of paper instead of infinite space.
Right.
ChatGPT can give you some constraints.
Yeah, they'll narrow stuff down. And along those lines, this wasn't on my list, but we've talked about it before, is that it's really good at bibliographies. Mm-hmm. Like if I want to know, like I asked at the primary sources for, Apollo, it gave me those right away. Otherwise I would have to dig around, throw a whole bunch of entries and figure that out. So that was good for that. Mimic style. You can, if someone has a really recognizable style, you can ask it to mimic that style. Now it's maybe not going to say things that make sense always. The example I gave it, I asked it to write this point basically that we're talking about in the style of Robert E. Howard. And, he's the author of Conan the Barbarian. And it wrote, in the unholy crucible of machine sorcery, the artifice of intelligence is conjured forth to weave the spectral echoes of the departed. By compelling it to inscribe in the cryptic lexicon of the revered scribes, the automaton imbibes the voices of the long silenced, speaking in the tones of those entombed in the literary annals. That sounds like Robert E. Howard. It's his vocabulary. Now, unholy crucible of machine sorcery. I don't really know that a crucible, is it a crucible? You can make that argument. I pulled that out when I used it later.
Word salad, yeah.
But machine sorcery. I like unholy machine sorcery. I liked quite a bit. Yeah. So that was a good usage. You can use it to find the style and pull something out and just for fun. I don't think you'd call it your writing in the way that I don't call AI art my art. But it give you something fun that's close.
Sort of related tangential comment, not in relating to AI, but to humans who want to write and to write better and to develop a writing voice.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is true for everybody, but certainly true for me. You will eventually, they say you become the sum total of your 5 closest friends. Uh-huh. You will write the way that the people you read write. So whatever style you want to emulate, read a lot of that, Yes. I've noticed it in particular because I went from listening to a whole lot of Christopher Hitchens and Stefan Molyneux to listening to a lot of Vox Day and Curtis Yarvin. And I like Vox Day and Curtis Yarvin, but they're not very good speakers. And I noticed that I actually began pausing more and umming and eyeing, like Curtis Yarvin in particular, brilliant thinker, is not nearly as fluent of a speaker as Hitchens or Molyneux. And the same is true with writing voice. I read exactly, my wife's birthday was a couple days ago, and I got her a book by Borges. Mm-hmm. And I have a long tradition. She's a big fan of English writing style and meter and the sound of English writing. I have this bad habit of always buying her English books by foreign authors like Haruki Murakami or people like that. But Borges, she was set up to be disappointed. And just not just the first page, but the first 2 sentences were just mind-blowingly perfect English sentences that immediately carry you into the story, which is a story about a guy telling a story that you're not sure if it is true or false. It's set up as to be kind of historical, but he's telling you it's made up, but you're not quite sure. Right. And it's just so excellent. And you can already, even after just a couple pages, begin to feel the way you put sentences together and ideas together change ever so slightly. The way people begin to adopt accents after living too long in a different country.
Oh, 100%.
So
Yeah.
So like, finding someone who writes in a voice that you like and reading a lot of that. And I believe strongly that rereading books is profoundly underrated. I think it's better to reread the same book 3 times often than to read 3 different books, because you'll retain actually something from something you reread. Whereas so much of this is a bit of a tangent on a digression, but I think people become addicted to the feeling of learning without actually necessarily retaining or learning anything, especially with podcasts and so forth. So if you find something that's good, has a good voice or good information, rereading that helps ingrain it the way you would do with a martial art, where you do lots and lots and lots of reps in order to develop the skill.
Yeah, Bedros Keuilian actually said that he reads books 5 times.
Nice.
Listening to them counts as well for him. But he said he read The Way of Men 5 times. And sure enough, I mean, when he was asking me about it, I'm like, he's pulling out stuff that I forgot I wrote. Like he's like, if you read a book or listen to it 5 times, you can start to teach from it. Like you can teach concepts from it because you remember it well enough at that point that it's fluent for you. So absolutely that, and I think that'll be useful information for a lot of people, because if you read someone a lot, you do pick it up. I pick up if I start reading Nietzsche, I will start writing like Nietzsche. Yes. Like I will. We vibe really hard, and so like I will start writing more like Nietzsche, which is always good. I feel like I should write more like Nietzsche all the time.
Nietzsche is such an interesting character. I never actually read the part in Ecce Homo which is subtitled "Why I Write Such Excellent Books." But I imagine it has to do with the fact that he's a philologist. Yeah. And as we were talking about before, with the importance of choosing correct words, Nietzsche understood all the words he was using, and he used them beautifully and succinctly. But people forget, I think, that Nietzsche's definition of philology was the art of reading slowly. Yes. And I think much of the problem, going back to rereading books, is that everyone wants the shortcut. Instead of reading, War and Peace, they'll go to ChatGPT and say, give me a summary of War and Peace. And for the record, ChatGPT sucks at that. It is really bad at giving you summaries. It can be good at giving you like plagiarisms of other people's summaries, which may or may not be accurate. But in terms of reading a text and giving you a summary of it, is not good at that. And most summaries are not good. Most summaries lose not just the substance, but also the feeling and the tone. And you miss out on the developing of the style. That's one of the values of reading great books in the first place. Right.
And just to wrap that up, I always say this, and this will be some other person who says I'm a Satanist, but I always say that I learned to write from Anton LaVey and Pat Buchanan in the same, like basically I was reading both at the same time because I'm that guy. But Pat Buchanan, if anybody doesn't know, he wrote speeches for Nixon. He was he could write something to a certain length and tie it up in a bow. And actually, Anton LaVey was really good at that too. His best work is not his Bible or whatever; it's his essays. And he would write, there's one called the Cosmic Joy Buzzer. It's like this great title. It's like maybe 1,200 words, and you know exactly what he talked about. He made one point, and it's memorable. Yeah. And I think my best work is 1,200 words like that. And I made one point, and you remembered it because I had a good title, and I explained it well, and I got to the end, and I wrapped it up in a little bow for you.
Is that Violence is Golden?
Yeah. I mean, that's all my best stuff is like that. Violence is Golden. Okay, that's memorable. And whatever. Learn to Love the Battle Axe, which is really a reference to Dr. Strangelove. But which is pretty obscure. But yeah, I mean, and Pat Buchanan was the same way. Now, if people don't know, Pat Buchanan is very Catholic, so like the opposite spectrum. but he ran for president and didn't win. But he was Nixon's speechwriter, and again, a speechwriter for a president is a very tight writer. I mean, well, they don't have to be now, but to give a good. I mean, I'm sure whoever was writing Obama's speeches was like a winner. To put that stuff out there, it's like something memorable, make people feel a certain way, but in a tight little compact thing. So
whoever was writing for DeSantis in 2021 and then quit before 2022 was also excellent.
yeah. But anyway, so I think that's a good point. And the only other point I wanted to make before we jump into questions here is, make it tighter. I hate saying cringe because I think it just sounds faggy. But when people tell me what their word count is, like I'm working on a book, I'm at 30,000 words. I'm like, oh, you don't know how to write. Like that's not. You don't ever brag about your word count. Like, no. I mean, it's how long it needs to be. Is it a good 30,000 words, or is it like you are just jerking yourself off for 30,000 words, which is normally the case? And like if you wrote a 700-page book, that better be War and Peace. It's probably not. It probably doesn't need to be that long. And so this is another use you could use ChatGPT for. Again, it won't give you a finished product that you should be happy with. You should always, anything it gives you should always spice up. Go back and add style or change something, but
add vulgarity.
If you have something that's 1,000 words, you could say rephrase this in 250 words, and it might help you compact it and see how you need to tighten something up.
Yeah,
I've used it for that a little bit occasionally, like just crunch something down a little bit that I'm saying. But anyway, always. And a point that I want to make about there's something that's changed really dramatically in writing is paragraph length. If you go and read Thomas Carlyle, you'll hear 2 pages of semicolons, like the narrow period will be found, like
the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah. I mean, just the semicolons and like it's like stream of consciousness. It never stops. And that has changed a lot. And I feel like I did a good job of picking it up because I worked in corporate environments before I worked. I mean, nothing cool, but before I started writing. And if you write an email with big paragraphs, no one will read it.
Right.
But if you like, dun, 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 and that's the way all email marketing letters are written right now. And I found that when I write books, if I want you to remember a quote, I don't care if it belongs in a paragraph. I will break that out in its own paragraph. I'll put the quote where you can see it. So, but anyway, so let's get the guys on the stream first. So we'll get their questions first because and then I can get to all the ones that I have from the people wrote to me.
So Taylor Martin says, "Howdy, gents. There's the often repeated line in literature that everything is a copy. What's a good way to analyze the line between inspiration and imitation?" Well, I mean, to me, so as we were talking about a minute ago, where you write the way the people you read write. It's I don't even know if it is a line. You don't want to plagiarize, obviously,
right.
But you can't let the fact that the things you're saying were inspired by other people or might have been said by other people before get in the way of practicing your hand at writing them. You might find that you have small differences of opinion, or discover that what you were planning on writing was said by someone else. I had that experience when I discovered Gadamer, a philosopher who created, essentially, he didn't totally invent the term hermeneutics. Schleiermacher did, but he I was going down some rabbit hole, some James Lindsay thing. I was like, oh, hermeneutics is stupid. It's a hermetic corruption and plagiarism of philology, that they're just attaching a magical angle to it, and they're trying to do something crazy with it. And I started researching it, and it's like, not only was I wrong, and the etymological connection was coincidence. There's no hermetic connection to hermeneutics.
Right.
It's was very much in line with what I had been writing.
Right.
It's like very embarrassing, but also kind of illuminating, and pleasant in its own way. Although it's always a little bit takes the wind out of your sails when you discover the thing that you thought was original, in fact, isn't that original after all. But
Right.
but I mean, if we were to not write things that were written before,
We wouldn't write at all.
no one would write anything, and also no one would read anything, because uh when people, Anton LaVey, might is right.
Yeah.
When was that written? 1912, 1918?
Something like that. Yeah.
That's a lot more accessible than reading Thrasymachus in Plato's Republic.
Right.
Especially in Greek. You at least have to translate it.
Yeah.
A 17th century translation is probably not going to be as pleasant as a 20th century translation. So there's a kind of a Heraclitus, you're not the same person, we're not in the same river dynamic that validates writing things even in the moment, even if it is kind of imitating things that I said before. But as with like a chess game,
Mhm.
or something else, you can try to imitate someone else all you want, but beyond a certain word count, maybe I give it 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Your own voice will come through, whether you're
Yeah.
trying to hide it or not.
Yeah. And if you're doing full character like that, you should not, because it's what happens. I think, especially, this is a teenager thing. I think a lot, maybe carrying into young adulthood for people, but people see read a lot of 19th century literature. If you start writing like 19th century writers, you're ridiculous. Because you can pull a little bit of, you can again pull in a little pepper and like make a reference or whatever, but if you start using their syntax and so forth, you sound old timey. You sound like anachronistic and old timey, and that's not going to connect with a modern audience, and it makes you seem like you're at a Renaissance fair, or like you're LARPing. Basically, you're LARPing. You're in their period. So if someone had asked me in one of the emails, like, I would like to write like Hemingway. Well, what is Hemingway? How does Hemingway write? Well, he writes in short sentences, very sparingly, and is very careful about not adding too much like flowery detail of things. So you can do that in modern English in your own way, in your own voice. You just wouldn't start. Don't write about bullfights unless you went to one. Like it's
Right.
It's not. Don't start like making things up. But if you wrote about going to the grocery store in Hemingway's, like sentence structure, that's going to be new.
Yeah. Well, if you want to write like Hemingway, just read a lot of Hemingway. If you try to write like Hemingway, there's going to be a kind of stilted, inauthentic incongruity feeling in your sentences that's going to make them feel uncanny and off. You're better off just letting the influence happen organically, if there is going to be any influence, and don't try to imitate Cormac McCarthy. Don't try to imitate Kerouac or Hemingway or Palahniuk, or any of these great writers with their own. You don't try to be the new Joyce. Just write like yourself, which is like very useless advice generally, but in the context of not trying to imitate other people in a conscious effort, just follow the rules of good writing. And this may be counterintuitive, but following the rules of conciseness and clarity and all these things we've been talking about, 1 + 1 not 2, and things like that, you are not going to sound like a cookie cutter generic college graduate writer. You are going that the way a journalist sound. They've got much tighter rules than you have to follow. Following the rules of good style, which they don't often follow anyways, will make you sound like a better version of yourself. So don't be afraid to follow rules of good writing. You're not losing your voice. You're not losing your authenticity or yourself. You're becoming a higher version of that.
Yeah.
And your style, insofar as you have a style, cannot actually be repressed. So you don't. There's an asterisk there, but it can't be repressed just by making your writing better. I'll say.
Right.
And there are exceptions to all these rules. There are, Palahniuk broke all these rules, and Palahniuk's a great writer. You're not Palahniuk, different writers have their own voices that break the rules in their own. Like one of Orwell gave a list of great writing rules. Phenomenal list, by the way, at the end of Politics in the English Language, where he says many of these same things. He says, omit needless words, or his own version of that. Reduce everything as much as possible. He advises to prefer Anglo-Saxon root words to Greek or Latin root words because they sound less pretentious and they're clearer. And he gives a few other rules, but his fifth rule is break any of these rules or all of them before you write something truly dreadful. And
well, yeah, one of the ones another tool that we have that makes editing helpful because autocorrect or spell check. The old spell checks wouldn't catch certain things, but so I have a subscription to Grammarly, and so I'll run everything through Grammarly, and it still won't catch everything, but it'll give you a whole bunch of suggestions for how to fix this or that, and just flag things, and it'll give you something to think about. But sometimes it's like, no, the way it wants to say it is not in my voice anymore. Right. The way it wants to word, it doesn't
sound right.
It doesn't is going to, like a lot of times, that is going to be something. That's how I talk. So that's my voice, and that's, people understand that, they know what I'm saying is that. And so I'll leave that there. And the other thing it always flags is, and this is always a decision, and sometimes I take their advice and sometimes I don't, is passive sentence structure.
Sometimes passive is correct.
Yeah, especially if you're writing something that sounds kind of a little churchy.
Yeah,
something that's supposed to sound that has a little biblical, churchy kind of feel to it, like prophecy or something like that. It's going to have this it's going to be in a passive voice.
Yeah.
So it's just the convention of that. So you have to know when to, again, break that rule. But sometimes I'll be like, yeah, I could say that in an active voice. That'd be better.
So yeah, I don't know if we answered Taylor's question. What's a good way to analyze the line between these two? But it's basically, there's a little bit of both. Don't plagiarize. Don't try too hard to imitate. But don't be afraid that you might be imitating.
Right.
Shitbird Militia says, imagine a world full of scientists, where humans are not animals. We act as animals, act in the face of extinction. Best practice, the thing you are acting against is an animal. So this would be an example where omitting some needless words and bringing a little clarity to the question, if it is a question, would be useful. I feel like this is unintentionally on brand with the live stream here.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm not sure what that means, but thank you for your comment.
Yes. Thank you for watching.
Mortician Stone. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I just retrieved The Way of Men by Jack Donovan. It's a great book. Everybody must read it. You're right. Thank you. Suggestions on fiction, especially regarding writing. You're asking the wrong dudes. This is not. I know you've been messing around with fiction, but haven't really gotten too far with it. Right. I know you've been playing with it, and I would love to write fiction. It might be coming to me as I get a little older, maybe a little bit less self-involved. I don't know. I think to imagine other characters was odd for me because I was always imagining myself. Yeah. But I do fit. I guess I write dialogue all the time for my dogs. I talk in my dog's voice all the time, so I'm improvising dialogue. I think and I do it for guys in the group. I wrote character sketches for the guys in one of our groups. Taylor's in that group in the. I wrote a character sketch of Vic real quick, and like a backstory for their as if they're graphic novel characters, and stuff like that is fun. I've just never written anything long. I wish I could, and maybe I will someday. But who else we got?
Well, as far as suggestions on fiction, especially, my advice would be just read more fiction. Yeah. I mentioned and read fiction that expands your view of what is possible in writing. I know Cormac McCarthy has become very popular, especially Blood Meridian and The Road. But if I could offer 3 additional suggestions, I mentioned Borges before, cannot recommend him highly enough. He's truly excellent. And Haruki Murakami. And if you haven't read Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, he's a very good writer. And they just give you a different idea of the way people use words to tell stories, which sounds like a pedantic way of putting it, but it is what you're doing. And the way you use words has to be congruent with the story you're telling. And Borges, Murakami, and Palahniuk are all and the big one, Nabokov. If you haven't read Vladimir Nabokov, Pale Fire, or if you've got a strong stomach, Lolita, very, very highly recommended.
Would they have like a signed copy of that on Epstein's Island?
No. So there's here's a digression on Nabokov. There's another great writer named Martin Amis, and Christopher Hitchens seconded this argument, who said that Lolita is actually a moral masterpiece, because what he does in Lolita is demonstrate over the course of this absolutely fucked up book that for those of you who aren't aware, the protagonist is also an anti-hero, is also the narrator, and he's speaking in the second person directly to the reader as if he's in a court trial. It's very unnerving because he is a pedophile and he is describing his affair with this pubescent young girl. And what it portrays is the idea that pedophilia can actually be a form of love. But on the other side of that depiction, it's not merely just as fucked up, is in some sense more fucked up. And the fact that it could be a form of love makes it no less of a corrupt and evil phenomenon, and it depicts that over the course of the story. You can't just hear it and be like, oh, it clicks. And it's like, no, let this burn into your soul. There's this horrific Nietzschean parable of a saint who is confronted by a man who has a child who's deformed, and the saint tells the man, kill the child and then hold it in your arms for another week or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's that kind of hard wisdom that Nabokov is bringing to this. And Martin Amis says this is the strongest argument against pedophilia, stronger than any of the sort of default Christian right stuff, because it would just dismiss it as wrong because the Bible is something millstone around your neck or whatever. No, it says, no. Actually feel the weight of how fucked up this situation is.
Okay.
And it absolutely destroys that facile and stupid argument that love is this all excusing, all forgiving thing. Oh, anything done out of love is good. No, it's not. Right. Cool. So, but the use of language there is absolutely phenomenal. And Nabokov is interesting because, like Borges, his English is not his first language, but he is a better, and Salman Rushdie is like this too. His use of English is decades beyond the vast majority of English speakers.
Cool. And I'm glad that you wrapped that back around, because I thought for a minute there I was going to have to hit technical difficulties. Like, whoa!
Sorry.
It's like not cool. But
yeah.
I was like, I mean, I knew you would get back to some kind of insane point, but for a minute there, it sounded like a mess. I'm like, I don't want that pulled out of the quote.
Yeah, there is a great speech by Amos about Nabokov, but yeah, we can return to the saner questions.
Yeah, we got to get the questions. So these guys don't, they've been nice enough to listen in along. And I appreciate this is the best roll of questions that we've had. Let's see. So
building tribes,
writing organized thought could be one of the most important things for the tribe. I would say real quick, I'm just going to answer super quick, is that there's a temptation when guys try to start groups of men that they want to create all the bylaws and the whole organization from the beginning. And that isn't how groups really form. It's an organic process. If you do too much of it's good to have a plan, but that plan needs to evolve and take other people's ideas into account. So yes, you should articulate idea, but and honestly, that's what we're doing. We're doing this for the Order of Fire, right? We're Christopher and I have like hashed out a few ideas that are kind of part of what our group believes now, and that's how it should work. It shouldn't work like one dude sits down and writes the Bible for the group before he asks anyone to join, because that doesn't normally work out very well. But anyway, next question. It'd be great if next session if you get Stephen Pressfield. I think he followed me for a little bit, and I think he knows who I am, but like I don't think I'm on the hey, come on my podcast level with Stephen Pressfield yet. Great writer, Gates of Fire is fantastic, highly recommend it. We got next. As a writer, are you always thinking about writing for an audience or writing from just your own inner? I have a hard time finding the right word. I suppose it depends. Writing for yourself. And basically, that's what we're advocating that other people do. If I was going to be crass right now, I'd be like, there is only Jack Donovan. I only write for the people. I have not,
his follow-up question is, is it just masturbation if you write for yourself? And I think this goes back to the thing we were talking about at the beginning. On the contrary, that might be the most valuable part, right. is writing to clarify your own thoughts and maybe to turn those feelings you're having into thoughts proper. That's not masturbation. Calling writing for yourself masturbation is what people will tell you when they don't want you to write. Right. They don't want you. They'll say, "Oh, you're so vain if you're like working out in the gym." Like they don't want you to look better than them.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's these two things are also not mutually exclusive. I mean, obviously, I'm going to write something for public consumption, but also that clarifies my opinion on it. Now that's my opinion, and then when I discuss things, I'm working from that. So it's also for me too. So it all feeds into itself. Okay. Do you recommend self-publishing or the traditional route? I also got this as a email question, and that's something that I can speak to really well. My first book, which shall not be named, but my first book, I had a traditional publisher. I got to go in Barnes and Noble and pick it out of the shelf, and like it was there, and that's super cool. And I made $1,500 from that book, and I got it like 2 years later. So, and that's how book publishing works. They call self-publishing. They used to call it vanity publishing because it was for people who couldn't get a real publisher.
That's how you use words to diminish something. I can't speak. Diminish something.
Yeah,
like masturbation. Oh, it's just vanity publishing.
Yeah. And now, I mean, if I would say that the mainstream publishing route, unless you're have a book that's really going to connect with a really wide audience, and that's how it gets there. There are certain kind of books that you really have to go through a main publisher, I think. But I would almost say that the traditional route is the vanity publishing route. There are a lot of people who write ghostwritten books who go through a traditional publisher. Why? Because they're doing it for the prestige, and so they have a card to sell, and it also means that you don't need to make money from that book. So the book is just a calling card. It's like a little product that you've put out. It's that you don't need to make money from it. I mean, if you're an author and that's the way you make your living, don't go to a publishing company. You'll never make any money.
Conversely, one of the most successful fiction writers out there currently is self-publishing, but is so not in it for the vanity that they're still anonymous. They go by the pseudonym Delicious Tacos. They have a Twitter account that they push their books by. I assume it's a man that writes like a man. Yeah. I've read one of his books. Very good writing. It's fun reading, and he's got a few other ones out there too. Those are all self-published, and he does excellent. The economics of it and the amount of control that you have over it, there is some value to having an editor say, I think you should not include this part. I think you should cut that.
I would love to have someone who actually understood my work in the context of it, just tell me what to do. You know, like Jack, no, this isn't you. Like, look at my essay that I'm trying to write right now and be like, oh, you know what you should really do is this. Like this part was good. This part, that's shit. Like, okay, I'll go do that. Thank you for making those decisions for me.
Right.
But I mean, that would be cool. And, you know, that is one advantage that obviously those writers have. But who are the editors in major publishing companies? They're all women. So, you know, like I'm going to have a woman edit my book. I feel like that's like a men's coach who has a female life coach. Like you're going to let someone in your head really change all this for you? Like, no. So yeah, and like the economics of it just is basically, people always ask me, should I buy something directly from you or through Amazon? And the way it works right now is that like I have a publishing company that I go through that distributes the books, and I get X amount of dollars. You can do it directly through Amazon. A lot of people do that. Maybe you do that, Chris. Is that
I just use KDP on Amazon.
you do KDP, right? I actually use a company called Lightning Source, and they're owned by Amazon, so it's all the same, really. But it's like one step forward because I actually do the layout myself, and so like in InDesign, and then they can they can ship the books to anywhere, and so like, but I get like $4 a book, and it's just because of whatever I price it at, and so that's the best way to do it, because yeah, I can ship you a book, but then that's a job for me that I have to go out in my garage and print a label and you know, it's like, yeah, if Amazon can do that 100 times in a day, I'd much rather do that, because then I can do more writing. So that's basically like, your traditional publishing for most people, unless you're a big deal, is going to be a ripoff. And they're going to give you like a tiny pittance, and they're going to give it to you like 2 years later.
The pitch for traditional marketing was, you know, marketing and distribution. And in the age of the internet, you do your own marketing anyways. Your personal social media presence is better than their marketing, and distribution is irrelevant with Amazon. So, you know, there's no real argument for that.
Yeah. And the other thing, book business thing that people don't understand, the reason why I could be in a bookstore, like, I mean, I am in small bookstores sometimes, but if they just decide to order it because it's available. But the way the book publishing industry works, it's a whole bunch of middlemen. And basically, in order for me to get in like a Barnes and Noble or like a mainstream, like big box bookstore, I have to accept returns. And basically what they'll do, if you go into a Barnes and Noble, whatever big book they're selling right now, like the big thing that they're pushing, they'll have like 50 copies of it, 100 copies of it. It'll be everywhere, whatever, it'll be up in the front. And if those don't sell, they will send them back. So they bought however many books from you for like $40,000 worth of books. Yeah, if those don't sell, you're going to write them a check back for another to return for $30,000. So you better have that in the bank. And that's what I never felt when I was a delivery guy. I'm like, I can't take returns. I'm never going to have that much money in the bank. So yeah, that's how that works. And that's why it's not worth doing for most people. But anyway, what else we got here?
What do you think of Robert Greene's writing style?
Real quick, I think that he's a sociopath. I mean, I think his writing style is probably pretty good, but he writes product books. Like in obviously, I believe one of his isn't that other sociopath, the Stoicism guy, his
Brian Holiday. Yes,
yeah,
they're good.
Mentored Brian Holiday. They're like, and I feel like he looks like. I mean, this is mean, but he doesn't care about me, and I don't care about him. I'm not. I feel like he looks a little bit like the evil that he's done has like taken on over his face. Like, there's something. It looks like the man's sick. Yeah, but
well, in terms of how that affects his style, because there are probably other sociopaths who are great writers, but what my reading of I read like the first 3 chapters of 48 Laws of Power, like 6 or 7 years ago. And it struck me as particularly mundane. Like, he's not saying anything that you wouldn't learn better from like Sun Tzu or Musashi or the Prince. And like, even Machiavelli is less Machiavellian than like a lot of these success marketing guys today. Like Machiavelli was at least that there was an aim for the prince in running a good kingdom, running a kingdom well. And the development of political science, which is the art of holding power, was for that purpose. But it's funny seeing people who are more Machiavellian than Machiavelli. And
Yeah, which is most of these people. Yeah, like like I said, he creates book products. Yeah, I mean, really, it's an early chat GPT. It's like you summarize concepts and then arrange them in a easy digestible format.
Ryan Holiday might be the best example of that kind of bad writer. I think he once described his process as just. I mean, I read 3 of Holiday's, 2.5. I couldn't get through 2.5 of his books in quick succession over about a week. They were so formulaic. It was just a hodgepodge of banal lessons, like backed up by mutually opposing, profound sounding quotes. It's just a mess of the feeling of authority and ancient wisdom with no theoretical framework around it. Every chapter is a standalone compelling bit of advocacy that comes. You can feel his marketing background come through in his writing. It's not philosophy. It's not. There isn't a thought in his books, but it feels like there is, which is why I think he's so popular.
Yeah, well, it's like those these accounts that I think they would love to like have me as a client, where they would write my things for me, like my tweets or whatever. And if you look at what they post, it's like, like formulaic man advice, picture of a tough looking man, 5 things a man should do to blah, 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 blah. It's like, that's nothing. That's literally, that's soulless garbage. And so
that's not a thought. That's a feeling.
It's not even a feeling. It's basically like Chat GPT wrote, "What is a man?" Based on the available literature, what is a man?
And then someone told Chat GPT to now make him 10 times manlier.
Yeah,
manlier still, more manly.
Exactly,
awesome.
exactly. And so this kind of dovetails in the next question I have from the emails is that to publish a book and make some revenue off of it, what would you recommend as first steps if I'm in complete obscurity?
Don't be a writer.
My question for that was, why are you doing that? Like that's not a reason to write anything. I mean, if you really want to write a book, you write it because it
needs to be said.
Yeah, you have something that you can say better than anybody else. Or that that you feel that you need to be the guy who said it because you have a take or an angle or some reason to say something, or something original in your presentation. So something that you really bring to the table.
Yeah,
not like I would like to be an author is not like who cares. You have to. There has to be some passion behind it and some reason why you're doing it. So that's what I'd add. I'm not saying that person doesn't have that. I'm just saying like that's really what you want to look. And then if let's say that piece is there and you're going to write something brilliant, but you're in complete obscurity. Well, books are marketed now by, as you said earlier, Chris, your public image and your social media presence and all that. You can get around. You can do it in a non-thing. There are a bunch of guys who have big books who are anonymous right now. So if you're that guy who wants to talk in 4chan and like do that and do that, there's money to be made. You can be any character you like. But it's will those things be meaningful in 10 years? Who knows?
Well, there are all I will say there are all kinds of ways that you can game these systems and these metrics in order to make your book appear profitable. Every single book at the top of the New York Times bestseller list got there by gaming that list.
Yes.
Somehow, but the people who want to write a book, like every politician who writes a book, they're doing it to game it and get popularity as a means to some end. But if you want to write a good book, don't worry about the marketing, at least at first. You can kind of do that as an afterthought. There's nothing worse than the people who write their book with the marketing in mind before they write it.
Right.
The have faith in the quality of your ideas and in the power and the compelling style that you're writing it in. Have faith in your voice and in your thoughts, and then it will do what it's going to do. People will discover it. It might be 50 years later than you intended, than you would have liked, but the good books hang around. I think even books that are contemporaneous to their time hang around. We're still reading Herodotus, and he was writing about histories in his time.
Right.
But it was just excellent writing, and it was good information. And if you want to write well, I feel like this podcast could almost be relabeled like the problem with marketing and writing.
Just the last part here. But yeah.
Which is not to say that marketing is bad.
No, marketing is great. You need to do that. Now that's one of the things I feel like I did okay for being like not really know what I was doing at the time.
But it's separate.
Yeah.
Keep your science and politics separate, and keep your writing and your marketing separate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically, my marketing advice to people is if you write a book, that all the people that are, this is the easiest thing. You write a book, all the people who are talking about the same kind of thing, who have podcasts, because every damn person has a podcast now, is go on a lot of podcasts. Hey, write the book, and then you go on a lot of podcasts and talk about it. If you can get on your buddy's podcast and you just start there and you keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. You get 5 readers here, 5 readers there, 5 readers there. And that's mostly what I did to get where I am. So that's how you would go from obscurity. I mean, I did. That's how you would do it. That is going on a lot of podcasts. So I got a question, considering this is the birthday of Robert Burns, the Bard of Scotland. I'm just, because this is a great, the Bard of Scotland. I'm curious, do you have any opinion of his work or favorite pieces? I trust you've at least heard Old Lang Syne. I am partial to Scott's Wahay with lines like, lay the proud usurpers low, tyrants fall in every foe, liberties in every blow, let us do or die. Yeah. And I was like, have you ever heard of this author?
Oh yes.
Okay.
The one I know is on my dad's, not Dirk, but Skindu. My heart is in the Highlands. My heart is not here. My heart is in the Highlands, chasing a deer. Very famous Scottish poem. Mm-hmm. That line that the person is quoting here reminds me of the distinction. We might be talking more about the Enlightenment in coming months, but that James Lindsay is fond of distinguishing the French Enlightenment and the Enlightenment more broadly from the Scottish Enlightenment. Which I like the encapsulation there, which is very much a libertarian, just leave me alone kind of, with less of the philosophical constructs and
like less liberté and more fuck off. Like
a little bit.
Cool. His second part of the question, which is more of a question, is. Also, what is your view of poetry in general and its importance in the world of writing? Have you written any poetry yourself? And if so, is available to see? Do you have any process for composing verse? I just thought it would be interesting to talk about poetry generally. I feel like if I got really good as a writer, I would only write poetry.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's.
If you want to make money, poetry is the last place you go.
Right.
But you know how there are like comedians that no one likes except other comics, like a comedian's comedian.
Yeah,
I feel like poets are writers. Like basically no one reads poetry, but writers do, and writers appreciate good poetry. Good poetry is like magic, and it's hard to explain that to people who haven't been writers. But
talk about the perfect word.
Yeah,
the perfect word in the perfect meter, and it fits in the like and the rhythm of the thing, and in certain cases rhyme. That's a whole different level of the game. Is to be able to do that. No, it's fantastic. I would like to see. I feel like my good writing it has a rhythm to it. It's very distinct. If it's a good line, it's like it feels, there's a feel to it. Like I'll change things for rhythm in certain lines. And the closest thing I do to writing poetry, aside from, I mean, obviously did Invocation of the Storm, which was, I mean, I would be open verb. I mean, I'm not rhyming. Like I said, I can't rhyme for shit. But it is when I write ritual. In fact, and when I write speeches, and this is kind of a funny off-color joke, but when I had my speech, which was memorized, that I gave at an NPI conference many years ago, it was a 10-minute long, the first time I ever did a 10-minute long monologue. And Richard Spencer looked at my speech and he's like, "You are a theater fag, aren't you?" because when I write a speech, I write in poetic lines. I write where the pauses are, so I'll write it as I'm going to say it, and
Nice.
so like so it's all like half the page, and it's not like, rather than going the whole way across. So it's written as it is in verse, and then it, you know, a lot of times I will memorize things if they're the good parts, because I want to say them just that way.
Yeah.
And that's close.
To that point too, the like excellent word choice in poetry not only conveys exactly the right idea, but uses words that actually sound like the feeling they're trying to convey. I was speaking to a couple of friends recently about Homeric poetry, which is written in dactylic hexameter. And there's this beautiful piece of World War I poetry called The Charge of the Light Brigade, which is a rare example of English poetry that's written in dactylic hexameter. You'll find a lot of iambic pentameter, which is like, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more," you know, that Shakespearean stuff. But very rarely do you see dactylic hexameter, which is that half a league onward into the valley of death. And it actually invokes the feeling of horses galloping as you listen to it, at least in English. In Greek, it is much more fluid. And it's this, it's this very weird, surreal feeling. But it conveys its own meaning in the sound, and the words, almost by coincidence, convey the meaning of that sound. I was finishing up this essay, and I'll include it here just because it's fun. This bit of Goethe from his work Faust. He has this line, and this is told by Mephistopheles, who's a demon. It says, "Und das mit Recht, denn alles, was es steht, ist wird, dass es zugrunde geht." I'm sure I'm butchering the German, but that I'm butchering the meter too. "Und das mit Recht, denn alles, was es steht, ist wird, dass es zugrunde geht," which means, "and rightly so, since everything created in turn deserves to perish." And something about the sound of it, it's almost sing-songy, but also has this finality to it that's not just in the meaning of the lines, but in the sound of the lines. And again, my German is non-existent, but to whatever degree people can catch that sing-songiness versus The Charge of the Light Brigade, or if you want a horrible World War I poem, which goes in exactly the opposite direction. There's what's it called? Pro Patria Mori. The full title is escaping me. It's in Latin, but it's a prose poem almost. And now I'll have to look it up. But what people are able to do with not just the meaning of the language, but with the sound of the language itself. I don't know if you can finish my thought for me.
No, I mean, obviously, I mean, there's like, you're like an onomatopoeia or whatever, like that.
Yeah.
Words that sound like that. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to, you're making me think in German now. It's like the one that I have has a very similar thing. It might be the same one. Well, not the same poem, but the same thing that because I used it at Volgang years ago. It was because it's about Odin and the Wild Hunt.
Yes.
Ruf mich in storm en nacht en poor dik glijten of wilde levensjacht durch alle eeuwigheid.
Yes.
It's a very similar like meter than that. I'm like, that's the only German poetry I know. That's all I got.
Yeah.
But I feel like we just put our smart points up for like, ding, 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 ding.
Right.
Cool. The only other question I had here, because I know you have to probably go soon and we're getting late, but the only other question I got here, I just want to address it because it was a long email. And it was kind of a good idea. What he was saying that like, and it's not really about writing, but it's more about like, a checklist of things that men should do, like to level up in life, and he gives a list of stuff, and I just want to kind of address it just from a masculinity standpoint. Like things that a man should do to level up in life or whatever as a man and whatever. And he has like forge a blade or axe, build a fire, sleep outdoors, ice bathing or cliff jumping, like Ken Storns, who we've had in one of our meetings because I know him through Instagram and stuff. Learn BJ to Brown, and the thing is with stuff like that, it's very. I just want to address it because the idea that there's a list of things that you could do to be like the man, I don't think is really. It's not something that makes a lot of sense because it's going to be different for everybody. Not that like masculinity is whatever you want it to be, but these things are change according to what society needs. Like what men should be able to do, the things that men should have done or be able to do. All of the things we do now, they would have laughed at like 50,000 years ago. They're right. Like, whatever. I killed an aurochs yesterday. So but that's something that they were raised to do, and it's functional in our society. Like a lot of men. I joke about this a lot. Like a lot of men, like every man should know, like how to do this X, Y, and Z about his car and whatever. And I'm like, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to learn how to combustible engines run this week. It's not on my. I'll outsource that. And so
it's cool if you do, but you're not unmanly if you don't do 1 or 5 of these. Like,
I mean, like
list of.
I think Ken Storms is awesome. I think it's awesome that he jumps off the cliff. I'm never going to do that. I am comfortable with that. I don't feel like I need to. I don't feel like less of a man because I'm not doing that. I don't want to do it. I don't think it's a good idea. I would be the guy I live with always says that I'm going to be an influencer death anyway. Because I mean, it's cool that he does it. That's his thing that he's really good at, and it's awesome and it evokes some powerful emotion and so forth. But I read an article years ago and I wish that I could find it because it was a little bit more concise, but it was kind of a list of things that you would have to do to kind of be a Billy Badass in society. Just as a man. And I liked it. And it had to do with like how many hours of martial arts training that you would have on a regular basis in a week, like multidisciplinary hours of martial arts practice in a week, and how literate you should be in finance and things like that, and things that'll really get you far in the world. And that's the stuff that the martial arts is just that's a physical competency that's everyone doesn't technically need until they need it. It's not something you need every day. It's not going to make you money, and so like there's just a lot of consideration. So I think that checklist, if I made it would be a little bullshitty. Like,
well, and so much of it is a rock, paper, scissors game too, because it's like, oh, what's the point of martial arts when there are people who have guns? Even Bruce Lee is like, martial arts is nothing compared to a gun. But then there's a guy higher up than that who's like, well, why learn to do gun stuff when I can control so much more and not even need a gun with sufficient verbal proficiency and legal power?
Yeah.
And or wealth. And then it's like, well,
and I can
you can take it to
violence.
Yeah, and then you can take it even a level beyond that, where you have the monk who's like, oh, why do you need all this? Where I can like, the wealthy guy is envious of some other situation, and it's this whole circular loop of grass is always greener on the other side of the skill set.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to learn a lot of things, and I think there are things that I feel like most men should experience. And so I guess maybe it's not that bullshitty, but it's just I think it would be shorter to me and less. I do think that if you're going to eat meat, at some point you should kill something and know what that is. You kill something and eat it. I feel like you should understand what that is, and then you'll have a better understanding of that, because we all do that. That's like something that we all do. I don't care if you're Donald Trump or me or whatever. I think that would be good. It's good to be present for that and understand what that is. That's always been one of mine. And yeah, I do think that the Fight Club thing, like every man should probably be punched in the face and understand what violence is on a physical, personal level. Now, it doesn't mean you need to train martial arts every week for the rest of your life now. But I think that you know a lot more about that if you've done it. It's done it for a year. You know a lot about it if you've done it for a year. If you've done martial arts sparring, you know what it is to like punch and be punched and do that little dance, do the man dance, as they say. So I mean, things like that I do think are important, and they're for everybody. But a lot of these things are very specific. Are you ever going to be stuck in the woods and have to create a fire? That kind of shit. I mean, like, okay, I live in a desert. It's a totally different environment. What are you going to do?
So is the emailer's question, should a man write a book in order to level up?
Oh, no. His question was more like a suggestion. But it was kind of a cool suggestion.
Okay, gotcha.
And so I thought about it, and I just wanted to address it because it was like he'd watched the podcast last week, I think, and then like he wrote me a long letter. So I just wanted to address it because it's a point. I could see some. It would make a good. It will be almost crass. Like it would make a good like Discovery Channel version of masculinity. Like it's 10 things a man should do. Like that. I wouldn't. I don't think I would put it in. Yeah. Anyway,
with the exception that you're not a real man if you haven't built at least one shed.
That's fucking right. We have both built sheds and enjoyed the shed building process a great deal. So, as is the rule with masculinity is whatever I like and enjoy. And if you haven't done it, you're a pussy. Is basically
and not a real man.
Yeah, that's like retard version of masculinity that I have to deal with on the internet all the time. It's like, well, you ain't done it the way that I did it. My grandpapa did it. So, shut up. But we do shed building. I do highly recommend. But cool, man. Well, it seems like our readers, our watchers were actually wrapping it up for us in the comments. They're like, great show, guys. That was really good. You should do that again sometime. The show is over. But awesome. Anyway, man, thanks for doing this again. And thanks to everybody for watching and like and subscribe. We're getting our follower count up. Share this as much as you can. I think this is a useful one for anybody who's considering writing. And anyway, thanks everybody, and stay solar.
Stay solar.
Pater is the cultural arm of the Order of Fire. For more, visit PH2T3R.